A single spoonful of sugar costs less than a cent. It sits in almost every kitchen, next to the coffee, next to the tea, in an old tin or a jar, sometimes untouched for months. And while millions of people stir sugar into their coffee every morning, few realize that this very same humble spoonful can trigger something in the garden that many would call impossible. Tomato plants that grow lush and green for weeks, yet barely form any flowers. Plants that look strong but refuse to set fruit. Stems that appear healthy, yet the harvest remains disappointing. Then, an old gardener takes a spoonful of sugar, dissolves it in water, and pours it, not over the leaves, but directly at the roots. A few days later, something begins to change. Not magically, not overnight, but noticeably. New flowers appear, more life in the soil, increased activity around the roots. And sometimes, it's exactly the boost a struggling tomato plant needs. But pay close attention. Sugar in your watering can can help your tomatoes, or it can weaken them. It can activate the soil, or attract ants, mold, and fungus gnats. It can feed the invisible helpers in the soil, or, if used incorrectly, disrupt the balance. And that's what we're talking about today. This isn't just another internet hack or a gardening forum fairy tale. It's an old method known to many experienced gardeners, but few apply it correctly. Today, I'll show you why a spoonful of sugar in your watering can can suddenly encourage tomatoes to produce more flowers. I'll explain what's really happening in the soil. I'll tell you when this trick works and when it's completely useless. I'll share the exact amount, the right timing, and the biggest mistake almost everyone makes. And stay until the end, because I'll reveal the most important rule: why you should never add sugar to your watering can every week, even though that's what many online sources recommend. Why most gardeners get it wrong. When a tomato plant fails to flower, most people immediately think fertilizer. Not enough nitrogen, not enough potassium, not enough phosphorus. So they buy a bottle of tomato fertilizer. €9.99, €12.99, sometimes even more. They water, they wait. The plant grows greener, the leaves get bigger. But the flowers? They still don't appear as they should. And that's where the misunderstanding begins. A tomato plant doesn't just need nutrients, it needs living soil. Soil that works. Soil that breathes. Soil where microorganisms break down organic matter, release nutrients, and support the roots. Imagine your soil as a kitchen. You can have the best ingredients: compost, mulch, old leaves, grass clippings. But if no one cooks, everything stays raw. Microorganisms are the chefs. They transform what's in the soil into food that your tomatoes can absorb. And for many of these soil dwellers, sugar is like a quick breakfast for a tired worker. A burst of energy, not a full meal, not a complete diet, but a spark. And in certain moments, that spark can make all the difference. This is especially true when your tomato plant is in a transitional phase. It's already developed roots. It's in warm soil. It's growing well. But it keeps producing leaves and barely any flowers. A very weak sugar pulse in the watering can temporarily activate the soil life around the roots. Not because the sugar feeds the tomato directly. This is crucial. The tomato plant doesn't just drink sugar water and say, "Thanks, now I'll flower." That's not how it works. The sugar mainly feeds the microorganisms in the soil: bacteria, fungi, yeasts. Tiny creatures you can't see, but which decide every day whether your soil is alive or dead. When these microorganisms get energy, their activity increases. They multiply. They work faster. They break down organic matter more efficiently. As a result, nutrients become more available in the root zone. It's like an old wood stove. The wood is already inside. But it's missing the spark. The sugar isn't the wood. The sugar is the spark. And that's why this trick only works in soils that already have something to offer: compost, mulch, humus, old root residues, organic material. If you water sugar onto depleted bare soil with no life or organic matter left, it does almost nothing. It's like turning on the stove in an empty restaurant. It gets warm, but there's nothing to cook. The story of Karl. Karl is 68 years old. He lives near Hanover and has had a small garden behind his house for over 30 years. No large plots, no luxury greenhouse, just a few raised beds, an old shed, and 6 to 8 tomato plants against the sunny wall of his house every year. Karl was never a man of many words. He had his method: compost in spring, regular watering after planting, occasional nettle tea, and when the plants were tall enough, he'd carefully tie them to bamboo stakes. His tomatoes were always decent, not bad, but not exceptional either. Lots of green, lots of leaves, a few fruits. Some years were good, some were disappointing. Then, 3 summers ago, something happened that many gardeners know all too well. The plants looked healthy, dark green leaves, strong stems, but barely any flowers. Karl stood in the garden one morning, looked at his tomatoes, and said to his wife, "They're growing like crazy, but they won't fruit." A neighbour, an old allotment gardener, overheard and said just one thing: "You're feeding the plant, but you've forgotten the soil." Karl laughed. What was that supposed to mean? The soil was there, the earth was dark, the compost was worked in. Then the neighbour gave him a tip so simple that Karl didn't take it seriously at first. 1 litre of lukewarm water, 1 level teaspoon of sugar, stir well. Then dilute with 9 litres of water. Use it to water only the root area, not the leaves. Once. Not every day, not every week, just once, as a pulse. Karl thought it was nonsense, but he tried it anyway. Not on all the plants, just 3. 3 tomatoes got the sugar water. The other 3 got regular water. And then he waited. After a week, nothing dramatic had happened. After 10 days, he noticed that the treated plants looked brighter and more active. Not taller in terms of more leaves, but more alive. The shoot tips were stronger, the flower buds were denser. After about 2 weeks, he saw the difference. The 3 plants with the sugar pulse had significantly more flower clusters. Not double, not like a fairy tale, but noticeably more. Karl later said, "It wasn't like I'd fertilized the tomatoes. It was more like someone had woken up the soil." And that sentence describes the trick better than any advertisement. Sugar isn't a miracle cure, but it can be an alarm clock for tired soil biology. How it really works. This is where it gets interesting. Many hobby gardeners make the mistake of only looking at what's happening above ground. They see leaves, stems, flowers, fruits. But the real action is happening below, around the roots. There's a constant exchange there. The roots release substances into the soil. Microorganisms gather. Fungi form fine networks. Bacteria release nutrients. The soil isn't dead material, it's a living system. And when this system is active, a tomato plant can grow better, flower better, and become more resilient. But when this system is sluggish, you can water, spray, and fertilize as much as you want from above. The plant remains dependent. And that's the difference between a plant that's just being fed and a plant that's growing in living soil. The first needs constant replenishment. The second is supported by an entire system. The rules. How to do it right. Now comes the part you really need to understand. This is where you decide whether the sugar trick will work or cause harm. 1. The amount. Many think, if 1 spoonful helps, 3 will help even more. That's the beginning of the problem. Too much sugar in the soil can have the opposite effect. It can cause microorganisms to multiply too much. It can disrupt the balance. It can promote mold. It can attract ants. It can make the surface sticky and attractive to unwanted pests. In potted plants, problems can arise especially quickly because the system is smaller and more sensitive. So the rule is simple. Sugar water for tomatoes must be very weak. Not sweet like lemonade. Not concentrated. Not so much that you think, now the plant is getting real energy. No, just a light pulse. That's all. The correct ratio, 1 level teaspoon of sugar in 1 liter of lukewarm water. Stir until dissolved. Then dilute with 9 more liters of water. You end up with 10 liters of very weak sugar water. Use this to water directly at the root area, not the leaves, not the fruits, and not on dry, hot soil at midday. Best time, in the morning, when the soil is slightly moist, or after you've watered normally beforehand. Why? Sugar water should never come into contact with completely dry roots. Dry soil absorbs liquid unevenly. Some runs off, some stays on top, and that's where ants or mold can take advantage. You don't want the sugar on the surface. You want it in the active root zone, where the microorganisms are, where soil life is working, where the pulse is needed. 2. When to do it. Not right after planting. That's the first mistake. Many plant their tomatoes and want to give them everything at once. Yeast, sugar, fertilizer, manure, all in one go. But newly planted tomatoes need rest first. They need to establish themselves. They need to form new roots. They need to adjust to the soil. If you start with tricks too early, you'll do more harm than good. Wait at least 10 to 14 days after planting. The plant should be visibly established. The leaves shouldn't be drooping. The soil should be warm, and the nights shouldn't be cold anymore, because in cold soil almost nothing happens. Microorganisms work slowly. Roots absorb less, and your sugar pulse will fizzle out. The best time is when the tomato plant is growing vigorously and is about to start flowering, or when it's growing but hesitating to flower. Then the pulse can be useful, once during this phase. And if the plant later has many flowers but seems weak, you can do it a second time after 3 to 4 weeks, but no more often. Listen carefully. Sugar water is not a weekly program. It's a pulse. Maximum 2 to 3 applications per season, no more. Because living soil needs rhythm, not constant stress. You wake it up, then you let it work. You give it a spark, then you let the fire burn. You don't stand there and pour gasoline on it every week. And that's what many people get wrong. They see a little success and get greedy. Another spoonful, another mix, another watering, more flowers, faster, and suddenly the problems start. Ant trails in the bed, tiny flies over the soil, mold on the surface, plants that are green but not stable. Then they say, the sugar trick doesn't work. But the trick wasn't the problem. The overdoing was. In gardening, this is almost always the case. It's not the method that destroys the plant. It's the person who can't stop. A little water is life. Too much water is rot. A little sun is strength. Too much sun is burning. A little sugar can activate soil life. Too much sugar causes chaos. And that's why you need rules. Here they are, simple and clear. Only use on warm soil. Only use a weak dose. Only water at the roots. Only use on soil with organic material. No more than once every 3 to 4 weeks, maximum 2 to 3 times per season. Never use as a substitute for compost, because compost is the meal. Sugar is just the start button. If you really want lots of flowers, you need more than a trick. You need a system. Tomatoes love warmth. Tomatoes love consistent moisture. Tomatoes love loose soil. Tomatoes love potassium. Tomatoes love roots that can breathe, and they love soil that's alive. If you give sugar water, but your tomatoes are in hard, compacted soil, it won't do much. If you give sugar water, but water from above every day, you risk fungal problems. If you give sugar water, but the plant gets little sun, it still won't produce a strong harvest. The trick is powerful, but only in the right context. The 1 to 10 rule, easy to remember. Here's a simple method you can memorize. Call it the 1 to 10 rule. 1 level teaspoon of sugar, 10 liters of water, water once. Then observe for 10 to 14 days. That's easy to remember. Not a tablespoon, not every other day, not undiluted, not on the leaves. 1 teaspoon, 10 liters, root area, weight. If your tomatoes produce more flowers afterward, you'll know your soil responded. If nothing happens, then sugar probably isn't what's missing. What's missing is the foundation. You need compost, mulch, warmth, better soil, more sun, or simply patience. And that's an important realization. A trick that doesn't work isn't always a bad trick. Sometimes it just shows you what your garden is really lacking. If sugar water does nothing, it could mean your soil is too cold. Your soil is too poor. Your plant is still too young. You've given too much nitrogen. The tomato isn't getting enough sun. Or the variety is simply late to flower. The garden speaks to you, but it speaks quietly. You have to learn to listen. And that's why I love these old methods. Not because they're always perfect, not because they can always replace expensive products, but because they force you to take the soil seriously again. The truth about gardening. Today we're constantly told that every solution comes in a bottle. Tomato fertilizer, flower booster, root activator, special concentrate, premium plant food. All with pretty labels, all with promises, all with a price tag. But the most important knowledge in gardening was never expensive. It was in the compost heap, in the rain barrel, in the wood ash, in the nettles, in the yeast, and sometimes in a spoonful of sugar from the kitchen. That doesn't mean you should never buy anything, of course, but it does mean you should understand what you're doing. Because those who understand are less dependent. Those who only buy must keep buying. Those who understand the soil build something up, season after season. And that's the real difference. Dead soil constantly needs products. Living soil needs care. And living soil gives back. More flowers, stronger roots, better fruits, more flavor, more resilience. Not always immediately, not like a marketing promise, but honestly, slowly, deeply, permanently. Final thoughts. Now, imagine it's July. The air is still cool in the morning. The sun is just rising above the roof. You walk to your tomato plants. Yesterday there were only a few small buds. Today you see new flowers. Not one, not two, but little yellow stars everywhere. You gently touch the plant. It smells like summer, like earth, like that unmistakable tomato green you'll never find in a supermarket. And you know, this didn't come from an expensive bottle. It came from your soil, from compost, from warmth, from patience, from a small pulse at the right time, maybe from a spoonful of sugar. And that's when you realize something. Gardening isn't just about harvest. It's about relationship, between you and the plant, between the plant and the soil, between the soil and all the invisible creatures working there while you sleep. And if you respect that relationship, your garden will change. You'll stop working against it. You'll start working with it. So, if your tomatoes are growing vigorously this year, but barely flowering, give it a try. Not blindly, not excessively, not every week. 1 level teaspoon of sugar. Dissolve in water. Dilute to 10 liters. Water at the roots. Only on warm soil. Only if organic material is present. Then wait and observe. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe exactly what your soil needed will happen. But never forget, the sugar isn't the miracle. The miracle is the soil that can still respond. The sugar just reminds it. Now, tell me, are your tomatoes already flowering this year, or are they just sitting there, all green? And if you try this trick, come back in 2 weeks and share what happened. Because sometimes a great harvest doesn't start with expensive fertilizer. Sometimes it starts with a single spoonful of sugar.